guys, and welcome to another episode of Similarly Different. I am with a very special guest today that I'm so honored to have in my first season. I am with the fabulous author, therapist, psychotherapist, Terri Cole. If you guys don't know her, please stop this right now and go and search her up. She has one book that I fell in love with, Boundary Boss, and she has another book called Too Much coming out very soon. So thank you for being on my episode today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
So I wanted to talk about everything that has to do with, I guess, the mental brain and how we process things, because you are the queen of being able to not only relay the information, but teach the information really well. And from your book, Boundary Boss, I learned that I had really bad boundaries, which I feel a lot of us do.
Yeah.
But in the same token, in your new book, Too Much, you talk about codependency, and you also talk about codependency in Boundary Boss a little bit here and there. And I just feel like a lot of people don't really know what codependency is or misdiagnose it, miscategorize it. And I just wanted to have a little chat with you.
Right on. You're absolutely right that people are confused about what codependency is, and there's good reason. So when you think about the most common things that people think about with codependency, this is based on a book by Melody Beatty called Codependent No More that came out in the 80s when your audience wasn't even alive, literally, and it's been reissued, but it really is the seminal text. It has been for years. But in that text, it talks about codependency almost exclusively, meaning you have to be in a relationship with someone who has addiction issues.
Right.
What I found in my therapy practice is that the definition of codependency has been way expanded. But what ended up happening for me is that I've been a psychotherapist for over 25 years. And in my practice are women like you and women like me who are high functioning, highly capable, successful women. So when I would notice that they were describing codependency in a relationship, a relational pattern, and I would say, hey, what you're describing is codependency, they'd be like, no, definitely not. I'm not dependent on anyone, Terri. Everyone depends on me. I'm making all the money. I'm managing all the people. I'm making all the decisions. And I realized that my clients didn't know what codependency was. So let's establish what it is.
What is codependency?
Well, according to me, codependency is when you are overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the situations, the circumstances, the relationships of the people in your life to the detriment of your own internal peace. So being lovers, right? We all love our people. We all want them to be happy. But when you're codependent, you're overly invested in those things, meaning you feel responsible for them. You take on the decisions.
Anxiety triggers.
But you take on the feelings, right? If you're codependent and you walk into your house and you have a partner, and maybe you walk in and you're in an amazing mood, like you had a great day, and you walk in and your partner's in a terrible mood, how quickly does your mood turn into changing their mood? Like, oh, can I make you a drink? What do we want to have for dinner? Oh, I'm sorry you had a bad, like your good mood is gone basically, because now you're just in fix-it mode. That's so much of what codependency is.
Would you say people that say that they're energy absorbers are codependent?
Well, you're describing an empath and even a highly sensitive person, which I think we should make the distinction between those two. So an empath is someone where you are very attuned and dialed into other people's feelings. And it's like we can feel other people's feelings, even when we don't want to. Right? Like this is just what it is. A highly sensitive person is similar, but if you're a highly sensitive person, you're highly sensitive to your surroundings. So bright lights, loud noise, rough material. And I find in my therapy practice that many of my clients are empaths and highly sensitive people and highly codependent.
So if you're an empath, how can you say I'm an empath or I'm a high codependency person or I'm both? Because I think a lot of the times, at least for myself, if I look within and I'm like, okay, I feel like I deal with codependency still right now in certain aspects like work. I feel like I've worked on it a little bit more intensely in my last relationships. But new people show you new things and then you're like, oh, I'm now using the same tactics differently. So I haven't really healed from it. But I'm also very empathetic. So how can I be able to separate? You can still be an empath, but don't lean on the high codependency.
Well, part of it is that being an empath means you have to protect your energy. And a lot of times people would come into my therapy practice or in my courses or my mastermind, and they would have no idea that they need to protect their energy. Because when you're empathic, it's like being someone who has like no door on your house. You know what I mean?
Right.
All those feelings, other people's emotions are coming in. And it's the same thing with having disordered boundaries, right? Where there's no self protection when our boundaries are too porous, which is too loose. So, as an empath, it's very important that you know that about yourself,
Mm-hmm.
that you do energy work, which there's a friend of mine who's a very great energy worker, and she has a ton of free stuff online that we can put it in the show notes.
And you also have meditations on Insight Timer.
I have,
I love Insight Timer.
oh my God,
Random throw in there. If you need a meditation app, it's free, has so many, and you have a whole section of meditations on there.
I sure do.
I love them.
Yes, thank you. And they really are geared towards my clientele. They're
Mm-hmm.
geared towards really women who do too much,
Yeah.
overfunctioning, because this is another part of what you're really talking about, Yanina, in your career,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where maybe you learned how to stop overfunctioning in relationships. But when it comes to our ambition and career, that can be really difficult to even identify that you're overfunctioning or overgiving or micromanaging other people. It's like this lack of trust
Yeah.
that other people are going to do what they say they're going to do. And I think we have to look at the fact that a lot of times we have trained people to treat us the way that they treat us,
Mm-hmm.
to expect from us what they expect from us.
And I think also coming from not having a lot growing up, being from Venezuela, coming from an immigrant mother as well, the fear also stems from what if it all goes away? But I lately, and I say lately in the last like 6 to 8 months, I have been trying to tell myself, you have worked so hard, it's not going to go away.
Mhm.
And it's so funny because I share this to friends all the time. And I told myself, you need to take that advice to yourself. I
Mhm.
always say, if you want to take a trip, take it. The opportunities are not going to run away. The clients are not going to leave for you taking 3 to 5 days off and experiencing life. You're going to learn so much in that trip. You're going to grow and you're going to be reset. But when I think about taking a trip and taking time off, the fear is so intense because of the fact that I'm so high functioning that I'm like, no, no, no. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if the people that I leave these tasks to fail and do it wrong? And it's realizing, oh, I'm high functioning right now and that's
Yep.
not healthy.
Yep. And here's the thing. You're over functioning, which is different than high functioning,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Because high functioning codependency, right? And high functioning, these are things that before, when I was saying to my clients, you're codependent, they were like, hell no. As soon as I added high functioning codependency, because that is really the flavor of codependency that I was witnessing,
Mm-hmm.
they all were like, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me. They had no problem sort of admitting that because they knew they were doing too much. They're exhausted. A lot of my clients would end up with autoimmune disorders and getting physically ill because they weren't taking care of themselves. They were doing too much. So I think what you're talking about is a fear mindset and a scarcity mindset, but it's based on past experience, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
not like, oh, well, what's wrong with you that you think that? It's really the child within you who's afraid that it's all going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
And having an experience of growing up with not a lot and having times when there wasn't enough, that makes sense. So I think the self soothing has to be in questioning that scarcity and in taking care of the child within.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you afraid of? We're okay. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
okay. And resting when you're tired
Yeah.
and really looking at, like, am I taking care of myself the way that I would a child that I adore? And if the answer is no, and you would expect a child to work
Right.
7 days a week, 24/7, which you would not, you wouldn't, then you have to like do better for yourself.
And at the same time, I always say when the iPhone starts going low on battery, it starts glitching. It starts being slow. So if you're like an iPhone and you're on 3%, you may think you're getting the job done and you may be getting the job done, but it's
Mm,
taking so much more longer than if
yes.
you were to plug yourself in for a second and just recharge.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to high functioning codependency, is there the possibility for you to have distinguished it, like I said, in relationships, but maybe in personal relationships and not know how to handle it in family relationships?
Absolutely. And here's the thing with high functioning codependency, where you're doing too much, where you're making all the decisions, we really have to get clear that it is an overt or a covert, right? Like an obvious or a more hidden bid to control other people.
Hmm.
And, Yanina, I don't feel like people talk about codependency this way, but
Hmm.
that's really what it is. We don't want the friend to marry the stupid idiot.
Hmm.
We want to warn them. We will cover up for someone when they make a mistake because we don't want something bad to happen. And we feel responsible. Someone else's life being a disaster is so stressful for us that we feel like I have to fix it,
Is it
right?
because you have to save someone because maybe nobody saved you when you were younger?
I think there's a combination of that. Or in my own case, my own high functioning codependency is that anything that is chaotic is stressful. I can't rest. I have three older sisters. I've got lots of close friends. And before I had a lot of therapy, anything wrong with my sisters was wrong with me.
Right.
Like I took it on like it was my problem. And you guys watching and listening, you can tell if you're wondering, gee, I wonder if I'm codependent. Think about your best friend calls you. She's in a crisis. How quickly does that crisis become your own? How
Mhm.
quickly do you drop what you're doing and start Googling shit? How quickly are you like, I have to fix this? Or are you getting in your car? And I'm not saying to not be a good friend, but I am saying I want you to really think about rather than, because we can be good friends and say to
Mhm.
our friend who's in a crisis, okay, what do you think you should do?
Yeah.
What does your gut instinct tell you about this?
Right.
Tell me more about the situation. As opposed to when we're high functioning codependents, a lot of times we're like, okay, I got this. I know someone who's a detective. We can figure it like,
You talked about this in Boundary Boss about how something happened to your husband and you started looking up for the attorney or the lawyer. And then you were like, wait, how can I support you? And I love that because that's so much me. I'm always like, hold on, we're going to figure it out. I'm going to do this. We're going to do that. And then now it's to the point though where people come to me and I have a joke that I'm like, I'm not Google.
yeah,
And it's kind of weird to shift the way people learn to lean on you because, like you said, you allowed them
yep.
to
And
treat,
taught them.
yeah, and taught them to treat you this way.
Yeah.
But as of late, every time when someone comes to me, if I have a lot on my plate, if I just don't have the energy, I'm like, have you tried researching it? They're like, no, we just figured you know. I'm like, oh my goodness, what have I created?
Yes, these monsters. But it's funny that you bring up that story in the book because the moral of the story of my husband being in a situation and me getting all irate because someone had wronged him
Mhm.
and me wanting to go legal. And I was, oh, I just wanted revenge. When I asked him through therapy, I finally like got it together because what I was doing was not helping. It was making him more stressed out.
Yeah.
And when I finally just said, babe, how can I best support you right now? And his answer was, you can have faith that I'm going to figure it out my way, which won't be your way, Tara. But I would love it if you could have faith that I'm going to figure it out. And I was like, okay. And he did.
Do you think high functioning codependency that also means that you are very much in your masculine energy?
I mean, yeah, that's a really great point. And I actually don't even really necessarily write that in the book, but I do talk about how it can negatively impact the quality of the intimacy in our lives. Because with high functioning codependency, we're kind of like decision makers.
Mhm.
We are managing people. We're not waiting
Yeah.
around. We're not fucking around and we're not waiting around.
Right.
We are getting it done, whatever it is. And this can play out in sensual and sexual relationships as well.
Mhm.
Why do we want to be in control? This is a part of being a high functioning codependent is we don't want to be vulnerable to other people. Sometimes that's because we've been hurt in the past. A lot of times it's because we don't trust
Yeah.
that anyone is going to do it the way that we would do it or doesn't have our perfectionistic tendencies and we want things done a certain way. But you bring up a really good point of how this can negatively impact how soft we allow ourselves to be. I remember I've been with my husband for 27 years, and I remember when it really hit me that like I could trust him,
Yeah.
like actually, and that he was so capable. I'm gonna cry. I don't know why. That's so, he's the best. But the relief, it felt like to me that maybe I could exhale for the first time in my life
Mhm.
and that someone sincerely not just wanted to have my back, but was actually capable because he had been a single dad for, his wife died. Like he had all of these things where he was capable at doing everything that I was capable of doing. And it was mind blowing. But the relief to be with someone that I didn't have to manage, I was like, wow, this is what it feels like to be loved
Yeah.
back,
Mhm.
not just me driving the ship.
Right. And I think that when I was talking about masculine energy, I think about the need that when you are in a marriage, even if you're a strong, powerful woman, to be soft and to
Yes.
know that they are there to care for you and love you. And how if you try to always figure it out, you could masculate the man and you
Mhm.
don't allow him to be his strong, powerful self. And in that, you kind of hinder the growth of even the partner and the partnership.
Yes, I think that's true. I also think, though, that what we're really seeking, and I write a lot about this in Too Much, is that we really want healthy dependency, But when we think about what is codependency, it means that one person has more power in the relationship than the
Mhm.
other. It's when we're doing things for other people that they can and should be doing for themselves. Mutual dependency or healthy dependency is what you're describing. There are times when my husband is the one leading, and then there are things I do better. I'm planning the trip simply because he'd buy any airfare and it would be $1 billion for no reason, right? Like, but I feel like there's a mutuality
Yeah.
in that, and it can't just be one person always leading. And we're really talking about energy, not
Yeah.
necessarily gender roles, right? We're talking about masculine and feminine energy and behaviors, sort of traditionally, where you both want to be able to have both.
Right.
And I think you're right. When we're high functioning codependencies, a lot of times we get so stuck in our get it done vibe that it's more harsh than soft.
It's kind of like you get stuck in a I'm going old school with this one, and I don't know if some of the people listening might not even know what this is, but it's like a VHS and the fast forward gets stuck. And you're just like, "Oh my God, how do I take this button out?" To slow down a little bit because I
Yes.
feel like sometimes when I see myself acting that way, I know I'm doing it. So there's an
Yeah.
awareness in me now from learning, teaching, and wanting to be better at it
Yeah.
that I'm like, okay, I've put this stuff into practice, but I'm like, the button is stuck. And the
Right.
idea of taking out the button just gives me even more anxiety than I'm currently feeling. So if somebody is going through the high functioning codependency feeling and living,
Yes.
what would you say are a few steps that will help not only you be aware of where you do it in your life,
Mhm.
but how to stop?
Start with taking a resentment inventory. Because what happens is when we are overfunctioning, overgiving, overdoing, even overfeeling, eventually we start resenting people. And so if you think, being honest with yourself, who are you holding on to resentment for right now? And then we have to look at why. What is it that you can do, that you can change? Are you overfunctioning or are you tolerating stuff that you shouldn't be tolerating? Because that also creates resentment.
Mm-hmm.
So when we do those two lists, what am I tolerating and a resentment inventory, that's going to act as a GPS to bring people to the relationships that need their attention. Where you got to go, I am resentful of this person, but I have not told them, or I have not asked them to do something differently, or I have not told them it bothered me. So that would then be your next step. And I think that for a lot of people, there's a lot of fear
Mm-hmm.
of speaking up. A lot of us women in particular have the disease to please, have the people pleasing syndrome. I don't want anyone to be mad. We're afraid of being rejected. We're afraid of people being angry or retaliating,
I fear making people feel abandoned when I speak
mm,
up about how I feel.
which is very interesting. And of course, tells us more about you
Mm-hmm.
than about the person. Because usually, whatever our fears are, a lot of times we're projecting how we would feel onto the other person. And yet, as we get healthier and healthier and evolve emotionally, we have to realize your job is your side of the street, meaning the only thing you can be responsible for is how you feel, how you act, what you say, but not how the other person receives it. Because, Yanina, sometimes people will receive it in a way and feel hurt,
Mm.
even if that isn't your intention, because of their injuries
Of course.
from the past, because they haven't
Yeah. Their
healed those
translation of
injuries.
it is going to be their translation, and you have no control over that.
Correct. But as long as you know that your side of the street is clean, as long as you are being true and honest, I think one of the most important things that we can do to be healthy emotionally is get super committed to the fact that what you think, what you feel, and what you want matters. And it has to matter to you more than what anyone else wants, thinks, or feels. And I think as women, we have been trained to think that's selfish. But as a therapist for decades, I promise you, that is where your healthy life begins, is being committed to how you feel, what you think, and what you want, because we can always compromise.
Mhm.
You can be a good listener, you can be an empath and care about other people, but not if you are self abandoning in your relationships. You can only end up bitter,
Right.
right? Like there's one stop on that train. That's
And
it.
also at one point you're going to hit rock bottom with it. You're going to blow up. And it's
Yes.
going to cause more damage than if you would have spoken up and had maybe a moment of uncomfortability.
Yes.
Okay, so the two lists, we make a resentments.
Yes. Resentment inventory. And what are you tolerating?
What are you
And
tolerating?
let's talk briefly about that one because people, so much of the time, we are conditioned, women in particular,
Mm-hmm.
to be like, I'm easy breezy, no fuss, no muss, you know me, whatever's good for you guys type of thing. Like as if our preferences are a burden to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
They're not. right? We talk about what your boundaries are, your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers. Those are your boundaries, but they're also the things that make you uniquely you.
Mhm.
And those things about me are what make me uniquely me. So when I talk about what are you tolerating, it can be from other people, but it can also be in your surroundings. Like maybe in your office, you have like a terrible overhead light that, like, every time you turn it on, you're like, I
Right.
hate this thing. Think about that and go, my preference would be to not have that be the light. Let me change that, because there's so many small changes we can make
Mhm.
in our lives that are self considerate, where we go, yeah, that is my preference and it matters to me. Or just having nice sheets, or do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
a lot of times we don't think about the small things that we can do for ourselves, but we're doing those things for other people all the time.
Mhm.
So you're going to do your two lists, your resentment inventory, and your what am I tolerating? And then you're going to be like, what changes can I make one baby step at a time? Right? None of this stuff needs to happen overnight. We're not
Right.
talking about, and don't confront the biggest relationships in your life. Let's start with like low priority people.
Yeah.
That's my advice.
Baby steps.
Yes, please.
Now, something that you said in the toleration, I think also can serve as a synonym for consideration. So if you are willing to have consideration for this person to be able to do X, Y, and Z, you should have that consideration for yourself.
Yes.
And it's like if you're able to tolerate it for them, why don't you want that for you?
Right.
And understanding that you should give yourself the amount of empath, the amount of grace, the amount of consideration that you give others, and instead shift where it's placed in the list.
Yes. It's so interesting that you really zeroed in on self consideration, because I created this whole category in the Too Much book about self consideration, because it is so much more than getting your nails done or a mani pedi, right? It's a way of life.
Yeah.
It's based in self love.
And it's so hard at first. It's so
Yes.
hard at first to give yourself consideration because I could be so tired and
Mhm.
somebody is like, I really need you to do this. And I will find the energy somehow. But then I'm like, I know that if I work out today, I will feel better mentally.
Yeah.
But I'm like, but I'm so tired. It's fine. And then I wake up the next morning feeling crappy. And
Yeah.
it's not even physically, it's mentally, I feel
Yes.
crappy.
Because you abandoned yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's called internal boundaries, and having disordered internal boundaries when we can show up for others, but not for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And again, just making that little shift, what changes in your life when you start showing up for yourself in the same way? So much.
Peace.
Yes.
It's so uncomfortable at first, and then out of nowhere, like a wave of peace comes over, and you're
Mm,
like, why didn't I do this before?
it feels so good.
It feels so good. I think that calmness piece is so important, and it's so hard to have it in certain categories in your life, and some of them are out of your control, but you're in control of yourself.
Yes, you can control your feelings. And in the beginning, you can't, because they're automatic.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're saying and the work that I do is so much about empowering people to go, oh, I'm feeling this way. How do I want to feel? Or why? So much of it is decoding. It's almost like a secret where we don't even know why we're feeling a particular
Mm-hmm.
way. So going back in time and asking, how is this person familiar to me? Where have I felt like this before? How is this behavioral dynamic familiar to me? And a lot of times, what we can discover with those questions, which we can also put in the show notes, is that we're having a transference, that we are having an amplified response to someone because they remind us of someone from the past. And it's that relationship from the past that needs our attention. Maybe we're still hurt or
Mm-hmm.
injured by something that happened, but we never really dealt with it. We kind of put it under the rug.
Yeah.
So you'll find people will kick that up in you,
Mm-hmm.
where you're like, I don't know why I can't stand this person. I have no idea. If you ask those three questions, who do they remind you of? I promise you, you will have your answer as to why you can't stand them.
Yeah.
And then you can relate to them from the now, not from history.
And I think also sometimes when you ask yourself, why don't I like this person? It's because they have the courage to be something that you're scared of being. And it's like, oh, okay, let's be honest. This person
Yes.
is confident. This person is standing their ground. They're so freaking annoying to me.
Yes.
Why? Because I still haven't made the jump to start that career. I still haven't made the jump to start that idea, to release that one thing that is a passion project of mine. So is it really them?
No, it's not. Because here's the thing, that's a great point. We are the common denominator in our life experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you find as you're healing and as you continue on this evolutionary journey, you really go, oh, I could learn so much about myself. What you said, like if someone is getting on your nerves, Carl Jung, who's a Swiss psychologist, a very famous guy in my world, I mean, he's dead now, obviously, but he originated the idea of the shadow self.
Mhm.
And it's like one of the things we look at is when somebody really gets on your nerves, you can look at them and go, what quality are they embodying that I'm denying in myself? Right. So if people have children, a lot of times you'll have one kid who really gets on your friggin' nerves. And if you really looked at that kid and the qualities, you'd be like, oh, I see why he's getting on my nerves, because he or she is embodying the parts of me that I'm denying. So it's really powerful work to do some of this shadow work where you go, oh, maybe I need to work on that in myself rather than judge her.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to high functioning codependency and really trying to work through it, there a timeline?
I think you're in recovery the same way you would be in recovery from addiction. That's my experience. I've been in recovery for a very long time,
Yeah.
obviously, because I'm older and I've had many, many years of therapy. But I feel like it's not something you get quote unquote cured from, in my experience, because we may always sort of have that little inkling towards doing too much, especially if you end up finding yourself in a crisis. It's like those old behaviors to want to control every aspect of everything can come back. But it's almost like with addiction stuff, it's just like a slip,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you can get back to your healthier behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one relationship at a time. It's one next right action at a time, right? It's one staying on your own side of the street at a time. It's really understanding what is your responsibility and what isn't, and then having the courage and the strength to let the chips fall where they may when they're not your chips. And that is hard to make the distinction when we are a high functioning codependent. I kind of feel like all the chips are my chips, but they're
Yeah.
not, right? Even when you love someone, they have a right to be sovereign and independent as you do,
Yeah.
right?
I've been open about my relationship with my mother growing up. And I think something that I learned in 2020 or a little bit after 2020 was that she started doing therapy in 2020. And I was so happy for her and I was so proud of her. And then after a few amount of months, she was like, I have nothing else to talk about. And I was like, what? What do you mean? Dude, I was like, "You are 50 something years old, ma'am. You have a lot of years to talk about, okay?" She's
Yes.
like, "Yeah, I feel like there's nothing more to talk about with my therapist." And I'm like, "Okay, well, maybe we should switch your therapist."
Yeah,
You
seriously.
know, I was like, "I've gone through many therapists since the age of 13 and just different people bring out different things of you."
Yep.
And she was like, "Yeah, no." She was like, "I actually think I'm really knowledgeable." And I was like, "Oh my goodness." And I think that when you like start going into a category of discovery, you can become really enamored and interested in the topic and then kind of a little bit of the teacher too quick.
Yeah.
And
A little bit of knowledge is dangerous.
yes, and I remember seeing that, but then after that, I realized that it kind of went downhill real quick and it
Mm.
regressed. And I think with that, when I saw that happening, I was like, I can jump in and be like, you need to do this, 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 this.
Mm-hmm.
Or I had to be like, I have to let her go. I
Yes.
have to either let her be that person or let her want to go back and learn more
Yep.
on her own and in her own time. And I think there's so much beauty, but also grace that you have to give yourself that when you are trying to work on letting go of the control of people around you,
Mm.
whether it's your partner, your sibling, your parent, a coworker, and being like, this is not for me to carry. I
Yeah.
have to let it go.
Yep.
And I still battle with that sometimes. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it swallows me up more than my own personal problems
Right.
of I'm letting it go, but I can see it from afar. And I'm like, I want to fix it because it can just be fixed in 3 minutes rather than like waiting their 2 weeks or 2 years or 20 years for them to
Yeah.
do it. But if somebody is listening and they're battling that and they're high functioning because in their mind, I love this person
Yep.
and I just don't want to see them in pain. What is, I guess, some words of wisdom or a sentence you would give them into how to walk through grace of letting go?
Well, part of what we have to think about is what is the cost to us to take on other people's burdens? Because you can't live the life, your dharma, your purpose in life, when you are bleeding your bandwidth and your energy all over town, taking this on from other people. You can't, because it's just not enough. Like, we actually do have a finite amount of energy and time on this planet. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so part of it is, I think most people don't consciously realize the cost to your life and your dreams by taking on other people's stuff. So that's one thing. Also realize that it's not loving. Like, we think it's loving, but it's really about us. I had a
Mm-hmm.
very painful situation with one of my sisters come up. I write about it in the new book, but she was in a bad relationship, in a bad situation. And I was talking to my therapist and being like, what am I going to do? I was like crying. I'd done everything that I could do to try to get her out of this abusive relationship. And my therapist was like, what are you going to do? And I was like, yeah, what am I going to do? And she was like, what makes you think you know what your sister needs to learn in this lifetime? And I was like, you think she needs to learn it in this horrible relationship? And she's like, I don't know. I'm not God, but neither are you. And she's like, Tara, I'm not saying that you shouldn't save your sister. I'm saying you cannot. It is actually impossible.
Right.
And that really shifted something for me because I thought I would be a bad sister. She was like, she has to figure it out. And I was like, well, what do I do in the meantime? And she was like, how about draw some boundaries, protect yourself?
Hmm.
And I did. And eventually she got herself out. And I supported her, of course, the moment she was ready to get out. But the most important aspect of that story is that my sister got to be the hero in her life,
Hmm.
not me saving her and her still feeling bad about herself,
Yeah.
right? So I think that if you're struggling with this control issue or high functioning codependent, I see you, I understand. I have no doubt that your heart is in the right place because I know yours is and I know mine is and was, but there's a reality that you really only have control over yourself. And a loving thing to do is to, instead of telling your friend or your mother or your sister what to do, is to ask them, what do they think they should do? What does your gut instinct say? Because it's your life and really how you feel and what you think, that's the thing that matters,
Yeah.
right? Because what you said before is we don't want to see them in pain. But
Hmm.
when we really love someone, we have to be able to tolerate how their pain makes us feel and hang with them anyway. That's really loving,
Yeah.
is to be like, this sucks and I'm here.
Right.
Not here to control you or you better do what I think. I'm here. I love you. I know this is hard. That sounds terrible.
And I think the I'm here, I love you is to the capacity that you can with a boundary, right? It doesn't mean like you have to be in the same room. You have to allow and let it, whatever the situation may be, let it bring you down, but not feel the need to control them. So I've created boundaries where I hold her at a wider distance,
Yes,
but I didn't take her out of my life
correct.
because I have to, like you said, protect my side of the street,
Yes,
make sure her stuff isn't dirtying my side of the street, but also I can say, hi, I see you there
right.
and I still love you.
Yes. And I support you in what you're doing, or I support you in your healing. But again, realizing and having faith that every person we love is on their own journey, just like my sister was, right? And none of us are God.
Yeah. So with me, I grew up with my mom always being very chaotic household and dealing with a lot of mental health problems. But what would you say for a person that maybe their best friend, their safeguard switched, whether it be because of financial struggles, whether it be because of addiction, life changes.
Hmm.
Now this person that they admired, they loved, switched.
Right. So, how do you have boundaries with that? And how
Yeah.
do you not take that on?
Yes.
Well, again, that is very similar to the situation that I was in with my sister. And it's emotionally very difficult. But the same truth applies, which is that if you love someone who is, let's say, suffering from addiction challenges, you cannot make them stop. They have to reach their own bottom. So, it's all about self care. It's all about taking care of yourself. It's all about having healthy boundaries. And you can love people from afar. I say about, because I have a lot of addiction in my family of origin, and that if you've ever loved an alcoholic or an addict, there's this phrase that says alcoholics don't have relationships, they take hostages, because that's what it's like.
You know what's so interesting though? My dad dealt with addiction his whole life. And I think because I met him as an addict, my stepdad, I never saw him that way. I saw him as, even though he was an addict, he was like a sweet addict.
Mhm.
So I think like every time like my mom wanted to be like, but he's an addict, change the look that you have of him.
Yeah,
I'd be like, but he's a big teddy bear.
right.
But I love him.
Hmm.
Like he's a sweet soul. And I think for me, I somehow was able to give grace to him, but not give grace to my mom while going through her mental health struggles.
Right. But part of that is if someone is not harming you actively, even if they're harming themselves, right? If
Hmm.
he was an addict, he was certainly harming himself. But if it didn't manifest as like violence and screaming and door slamming and chaos, and there was still a sweetness to him,
Hmm.
I mean, you're a kid, even as a teenager, you're not going to be like, oh, but I shouldn't think that's okay.
Yeah.
All we can do is relate to people the way they're relating to us, basically, especially when we're kids, because we're kind of a captive audience.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to me that if you didn't have these horrible experiences with him, that you wouldn't have that view,
Right.
you know?
But then, and I imagine, what if those two people mix into one, where it's like you had this sweet, safe person, and out of nowhere they switched and you saw a different version? That has to be so debilitating of, I need to fix
Yes.
because that's not the person I knew.
Yeah. Oh, it's incredibly painful.
Yeah. And the release of control must be really hard because of that, of you wanting to go back to the person they were before.
Yes. And how I felt about it, and I think a lot of people would feel this way, is that I'm being a bad sister or a bad daughter or a bad whatever if I don't. Like, it never even entered my mind until my therapist was like, you don't have the power. What you're trying to do, you actually don't have the power to do. She has to choose. But I felt like if I didn't keep trying every single day, that I was a terrible person. And it really was liberating for me to understand through that therapeutic process that I could look at my sister and have faith that she was going to figure it out. That doesn't mean, listen, not everyone, especially with addiction, not everyone does, but she did. And I made a promise that if she was ready to get out of that relationship, I would help her, and I did. But it was her. She had to have the impetus to change, not me being like, you don't deserve this, not me being like, don't you care about yourself? All the things that we try
Yeah.
to do with addicts, it doesn't work. And it is painful.
Yeah.
That's where boundaries come in.
And Too Much talks about the dependency, the codependency, high functioning codependency that we deal with. And do you have a workbook in that one? Because I know
Oh,
you
they'll be, yes. I mean,
have.
you know me. I mean, every book has a million exercises in it. So there are exercises in there that people can do to really identify where they are. But what you're saying is truthful before. You brought up Boundary Boss and said, I talked about codependency in there. I did.
Mhm.
But people understanding their relationship to boundaries is also the beginning of you understanding your relationship to codependency.
Mhm.
So for anyone listening, if you're wondering, like, where am I on the boundary scale? Like, how do I
Right.
know? You can go, I have a free quiz that people can take. Just go to boundaryquiz.com, and there's 7 archetypes. So you might be like the ice queen, or you might be like the pushover. So everyone will get a different, it's only 13 questions, but it's actually very accurate. So if you're wondering and you want to get like where am I on the boundary
Yeah.
scale? You can go to boundaryquiz.com.
Ooh, I think I want to do it because you just never know. I like knowing where I fall in it,
Yeah.
and then what you can do to be able to help
Yes.
implement boundaries, or like where you're doing good at. And with the other book, are you also going to be doing how high functioning codependent are you?
Basically, yes. That will be coming out because the book
Okay.
comes out in October of
Okay,
24.
perfect. So for the person watching this and they're like, okay, I'm codependent, or maybe I'm not, maybe
Yeah.
I'm just like nice, and they're trying to identify what are some red flags, if we can say 5 red flags that come to mind for them to say, if you check these 5 red flags, which you actually do in Boundary Boss, and you
Mhm.
say, if you check these things, this makes it that you are a high functioning codependent. So,
Well, number 1, doing things for others that they can and should be doing for themselves.
okay.
Number 2, get a lot of your self-worth from being a helper.
So validation, the need for validation.
Yes, but also like helping people.
Okay.
Number 3, a lot of times we're doing things that no one has asked us to do. We're just voluntarily getting it done on our own. And a lot of times people will resent that. Number 4, feeling resentful and taken advantage of by other people. This is how I felt when I was younger, right in my
Mhm.
20s. I didn't realize. I was like, these people are all so entitled. I didn't realize until I had a lot of therapy that it was me serving myself up on a silver platter and then blaming
Mhm.
them. Number 5, doing more than your share, right? Maybe you're on a team at work and you do more than your share of the work. Maybe you're in a relationship and you're the one who's always tallying up the bill when you go out with your girlfriends, or you're the
Yeah.
one who's always using your Airbnb account to book the weekend. Or maybe you're the one who's keeping all the relationships going, right? Where you're really putting in most of the effort.
Right.
All of those are indications of high functioning codependency.
Well, if you checked one of those boxes, or if you, then Too Much is the book for you, which
That's
comes
right.
out in October. Because we're all a work in progress. And I think I want to really back to that of, we're all a work in progress. Nobody is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, there is a journey to the healing
Yes.
of this, and there
Yes.
is no finish line.
No.
But the awareness does grow, and the habits and the tactics that you can implement when you see little flags start coming up in different situations.
Yes. And then what you said before is what you'll experience, which is a wave of internal peace. And then the more you do it, the more peace you create inside of you.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your tour. She's doing a press tour of many things with the top people and talking to me. I appreciate it so much. And if you have not followed her, terricole.com.
TerriCole.com. You can find me on
Yeah,
Instagram at
Terry
Terry
Cole.
Cole.
Yes.
The Terry Cole
And
Show. I got a podcast. There's a whole bunch of stuff.
yes, she is everywhere. If you have never read her books, Boundary Boss is an amazing book on Audible as well as hardcover. And Too Much comes out in October.
Thank you for having me, Yanina. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for being here. And until next time.